Oh, it is so good to be with you tonight. I hope you have had a pleasant afternoon, maybe a time of rest, maybe a time out in this wonderful, wonderful creation that God has given to us. Josh, I appreciate the words that you lifted up to our God on our behalf here a bit ago. He's right. You know, we live in a world where people are continually questioning whether or not God exists. And that you know, in our country, that's a relatively new phenomena of sorts. For a long, long time, people in general in this country have not asked that question. We've accepted that fact, we've assumed that fact, and maybe to our own detriment, we haven't always talked about it to the depth that we should have, and now we're having to wake up to the fact that we have a generation of people out there that these are the questions they're asking. And we as the Lord's church need to be prepared to answer those questions. And I appreciate the thought that you have lifted up on our behalf in that. I want to, number one, do you have your Bibles? Do you have your Bibles? Good. Open up to Ecclesiastes. We're going to be there in just a couple of minutes. One of the things that I love about what's happening at this congregation right now is that we are just seeing all kinds of new opportunities presented to us, ways for us to bring new resources to the table, new things for us to have at our disposal to try to help our work, either expand our work here or to make it more meaningful and all those different things. I want to let you know, in case you haven't been to the church's website recently, we have two things that are really exciting. Number one, we sent out an email earlier this week about a Google Calendar, just a digitized form of the church calendar. That has now been added to the Highland Heights website. Up in the top right-hand corner, you can see that. And if you are so inclined to go see that, you can go pull that up if you want to know what's coming up in the weeks and months ahead. But right next to that Google Calendar, you will see a button for live streaming. Jackie Whited has been working very, very hard to try to get us a situation where we are live streaming portions, if not the entirety of our service now, and we've been working to get that up and running. So what is good about this is that if you, for some reason, you're sick and you have to be home and you are not able to physically join us here, you can jump online and you can join us via the internet for that day while you're gone. In fact, I know somebody, I think it's Howard, said this morning that they were not able to be here, but they were able to watch the service and they really enjoyed it and it was good quality and things are going great. It's a great, great blessing, a great, great tool to be able to have at our disposal. Check that thing out sometime if you haven't been to the website in a while to look at it. How many of you are familiar with the NBA, the National Basketball Association? I expect most of your hands to go up because even if you don't follow it now, most likely along the way you've followed it, you've heard about it at least. Yeah. So National Basketball Association is the professional basketball league here in the United States. And a very, very popular sport here in this country, and the teams. I mean, this is like all of our professional sports. These guys are making all kinds of money. I mean, we're talking multi-million dollar contracts that these guys are getting. In fact, a lot of you probably right now are probably more excited about March Madness. You know, it's the college end. Well, a lot of these college kids are going to be playing in the NBA here within the next year or two. But, you know, a few weeks ago, I saw an interesting article and that in which the commissioner of the NBA was speaking about the condition, the state of the league. And one of the things that he noted, he said, you know, I've observed, he said that we have more of our players now who are just unhappy. They are not excited about life. They are not happy about the state of their team. They're not happy about the state of the league. They're not happy about the state of their lives. And he was bewildered about that in a way that I'm sure an awful lot of people were. Because he observes what we all observe. You have somebody that's making the multi-millions of dollars a year and they are famous. They have everything you would imagine. They have everything that their heart could desire. And yet they're miserable. Now, the commissioner of the league gave his own opinion of some of that. He said he thinks that a major part of this is that today there is this overabundance of social media, and you get the Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram, and people are just, these players are being bombarded by people's opinion of them in a way that has never been true of the league in years past. And I don't doubt that that's got to play a part in it as well. But it was just an interesting observation to me that you have these guys, young men mostly, who have everything they could have ever wanted. In fact, for many of them, this is all they've ever wanted. They have spent their entire lives training to be in this very position, and they have chased after this goal. And once they get it, it's not exactly what they thought. It's not as satisfying as they thought it would be from their childhood on up to their college years, and some of them on now up into their 30s, and a couple of old geezers in their 40s, right? That's the old geezers only if you're in basketball, right? But you know, they're not the first ones to go through all of that. When you open up the book of Ecclesiastes, I find that Solomon expresses the exact same problem. And that he struggles with this idea. He's in the book of Ecclesiastes, he is struggling through the question of where does meaning in life come from? Where do I find satisfaction and fulfillment in the things that I do? And a lot of people, when you open up Ecclesiastes, you begin and you start reading, and well, you get a little depressed pretty quick, don't you? You know, just look at verse 2. Verse 1 introduces who the speaker is. It's the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. In the very next word, first words of verse 2, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Some of your versions may say meaningless. Meaningless, meaningless. All of it is meaningless. It's an interesting picture. This word vanity, some of you may have a footnote in the bottom of your Bible that says this Hebrew word is the word for vapor or mist. And that's the concrete form of this word. And so you imagine the idea, if you've ever boiled water out of a tea kettle and it starts coming out and it starts whistling really nice and loud, how quickly is that vapor there? Not for a split second. And you can imagine what it might be like if you saw a kid that had the vapor coming out and they tried to reach at it and grab it and tried to maybe catch some of it in their hands. It's a pointless task, isn't it? Because you're never going to catch it. It's going to disappear before you ever really get a shot at this. And so in a metaphorical sense, this is what's happened here. It's that idea that to say vanity, if you were to chase after the wind or to chase after water vapor and try to catch it in your hand, it's a fruitless thing. And that's the idea that Solomon brings to this. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. And over the next several chapters, you will find that if you keep on reading, the truth of the matter is that a lot of people don't like Ecclesiastes because they get a little confused by it, and they start seeing a depression maybe of that Solomon is battling, and they start being a little irritated themselves. And man, I'm working hard in my life, and I've got all these things going, and you keep telling me they're worthless. You keep telling me there's no point in doing all of this. Where am I supposed to find meaning? Well, tonight I want to take a look at this, but not so much chapter 1, but I want us to take a look at chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, because Solomon, as we come into chapter 2, Solomon, well, let's look at this first. If you go to the end of chapter 1, one of the things that you'll find is that if there was anybody qualified to be able to talk about this, it's going to be Solomon, right? In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, just look at verses 12 through 15. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. And it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all of it is vanity, a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And so as we go into this book, one of the things that you understand, it is generally believed that Solomon wrote this probably toward the end of his life, after he had had all of these great explorations and wisdom and possessions and all this. And we're going to look at that in more detail in a minute. But if there was anybody qualified to talk about where satisfaction and meaning come from, it was Solomon. He says, I went through and I looked at every possible thing. And once he had gotten and experienced every possible thing, he said it didn't satisfy. Now, when we say that he looked after, that he pursued every possible thing, what are we talking about? How exactly did Solomon go about the task of trying to find satisfaction in this physical life? How is it that Solomon's life matches up with say, people who are playing in that NBA who are talking about all the unhappiness that they feel? How does Solomon's life match up with maybe some of our lives? Maybe there's some of us who are sitting here tonight that you feel like you're on the hamster wheel, right? And you're moving and moving and moving, and it doesn't matter how much you move, you just can't seem to find any real joy and excitement out of this. Well, let's listen to what Solomon says. How was it that Solomon went to this world in order to find satisfaction, and why did he ultimately say that it didn't work? Well, number one, I think what we can say as we come into chapter 2, a good way of describing this is that Solomon tested life. He was going to try it out. If there was an opportunity to do it, he was going to give it a shot. And in and of itself, that's not a bad thing. I think it's actually, in many ways, that can be a great way to go about life. If there's a way for me to take a look at it and me to experience it, you better believe that I'm going to experience it. Read with me, if you would, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly until I might see what good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves. I had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the children of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. All my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all of my toil, and this was my reward for all of my toil. And then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil that I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity, and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Solomon, with his kingly authority, with his incredible wisdom, and his seemingly limitless resources, had the ability to do pretty well anything he wanted. When you think about it, what person was going to look at Solomon and say, sorry, Your Majesty, but you can't do that? Was there anybody really going to tell him that? I highly doubt it. And so Solomon went out on a search for purpose and for meaning by testing life. He was going to do all of the experiences that he could get his hands on in order to see if he could fill the emptiness of his heart, if he could make his life meaningful. And in this text that we just read, I think we can find two methods, if you will, that Solomon went about trying to find that meaning in life. One was by enjoyment, and the other by employment, or the idea of hard work. In verses 1 through 3, we find the idea that Solomon spent his time trying to find pleasure and enjoyment and satisfaction through pleasure. I mean, you notice, and you notice what he says there. I said he pursued laughter. He tried to cheer his body with wine, how to lay hold of folly and all the silly things of this world. Now, you think about Solomon for just a minute. It doesn't take an awful lot of imagination, does it, to envision this grand king having banquets in that house. I mean, he has everything, he has anything at his disposal. And so he has this grand house with this grand banquet hall, table that goes the whole length of it, and it's just filled with food. And it keeps coming and coming and coming. And it is the finest quality of food, the freshest of fruits, the juiciest of meats, the sweetest of wines. He has the best entertainers that money can buy, or that royal power can demand. And they come and they show off their skills, they sing songs, they entertain. He's surrounded by all the noblest people in the land, people who are just scrambling, doing everything that they can just to have 5 minutes at the table with Solomon. But when the party is over and the king walks the halls in that great house, what we find described here is that his heart is still empty. He's still dissatisfied with all that he has had. No doubt there were people within his own house. There were servants who were looking at all of this, and these servants longed to be able to trade places with Solomon. Don't you think? I mean, isn't that what people do? We see somebody who's living the life, and there's that part of us somewhere that says, man, if I could just trade places with you for one day, I would be so happy. And yet they're wishing all of this, never knowing how empty this monarch felt in his heart, even though he had all of this pleasure and all of this entertainment. So much so that in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 13, Solomon would write, even in laughter, the heart can ache, and the end of joy may be grief. I don't think it's an inaccurate statement to say that today's world is pleasure mad. Billions of dollars are spent each year to buy stuff. And what's more, we're actually seeing perhaps a shift in the economics of this world. And maybe people are not spending as much of their money on stuff, but you're seeing an increase in which people are spending billions of dollars a year on experiences. Opportunities to try to get away and go do something in order to try and escape the rigmarole of life. To try to find some relief from the chaos and the pressure and the weight that they feel day in and day out. Now, understand, I agree as much as anybody else. Innocent fun, it's great to have a little bit of innocent fun. That's awesome in and of itself. But I think what's happening in our world today, and has been happening for a long time, is that more and more people are building their lives around seeking pleasure. This is what their purpose has become. And unfortunately, when your life is built around the idea of seeking pleasure, seeking entertainment, you are bound to be sorely disappointed in the long run. Why? Well, consider a handful of reasons. Number one of the things that it doesn't take long to figure out is that untempered pleasure seeking can quickly turn into a selfish endeavor. When your life is all about your own personal enjoyment and you getting what you want, then eventually people become willing to do whatever it takes to get whatever I want. Even if that means I must steamroll over a few people. Even if it means I must take advantage of somebody. Even if it means that I'm going to sacrifice good relationships and have shattered families. Another problem that we find with building a life around pleasure seeking is that living for pleasure ultimately results in limited or diminished returns. Here's what I mean by that. Eventually, whatever brought you pleasure the first time is no longer going to bring you that pleasure. And the only way you continue with the pleasure is if you find something else that's more extreme, that's more intense. This is the way that people get addicted to stuff. Did you know that? Whether it's substances or activities or things that they look at, this is the way that people get addicted. And so this is why it's never going to be pleasing, because eventually you're going to grow numb to this form of pleasure. You're going to have to go find something else. And it's going to have to be stronger and stronger and stronger. But I think there's a third reason as well. A third reason why pleasure seeking can never bring satisfaction is that pleasure seeking only appeals to one aspect of the human existence, of a person's total being. I don't know if you've ever thought about it in these terms or not, but you know, our lives, our existence as human beings is so much more than just an adrenaline rush. There is more to life than having thrills. But the things that people do for entertainment, again, in and of themselves, are not problems. But when that's what you build your life upon, what you're going to find is that shallow entertainment that gives you that adrenaline rush, eventually that's going to pass. It's here for a moment and then it's gone. But true enjoyment of life embodies the whole of a person's being. It's not just about the next thrill, but rather true enjoyment of life is going to consider the idea, yes, of entertaining ourselves, but also of having the strength of other people's relationships in our lives, having the satisfaction of accomplishment from hard work, having a connection with God and with His church, having the good health of our bodies and the strengthening of our minds. True enjoyment comes from the entire being. True pleasure in life brings not only delight, but it also builds character, and it enriches the whole person. And so as we take a look at Solomon, what we find in these first three verses is that Solomon sought meaning by just simple pleasures of life. And it was not satisfying. He was always looking for the next best thing. But what we also find that this idea of testing life is that he didn't just seek entertainment, but he also sought pleasure through this idea of employment, or another way of saying that is through hard work. Now that seems logical, doesn't it? If experiences don't fulfill me, then maybe accomplishment will fulfill me. Maybe if I work hard enough and I build up enough stuff and I complete enough projects, then I will be able to say that I am satisfied. And as you go down through this text that we read here a few minutes ago, you find that Solomon had an awful lot of great works, didn't he? He built quite the resume. He talks about building houses, and you can actually go through other parts of the Bible of Solomon's life in Kings and Chronicles, and you can read about these things that Solomon mentions. In 1 Kings chapter 7, we read about Solomon building the great houses for himself, unlike anything that had ever been built before in Jerusalem. He built cities, according to 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verses 4 through 6. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 33, it makes a reference to what he describes here as gardens and vineyards and orchards and forests. And then he had the watering systems in order to help keep them alive. Have you ever been to a castle somewhere or a mansion somewhere and you've seen the gardens that are just these lavish? Is that not beautiful? And don't you walk through them and think to yourselves, oh, if I could just have one of these in my backyard, I'd be happy. Solomon had all of that, and he built it, and he had people build it, because what we also find is that Solomon had a lot of workers. He had a really big base of employees at his disposal. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he describes that he had two different kinds of slaves. He had the kinds of servants that he had gone out and bought in the way that it was done in that culture. And then he also had some that were born into his household by by servants who were already in his house. The Bible will also tell us in 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 13 through 18, that Solomon drafted some 30,000 Jewish men to work on these various projects that he had going on. So he had people to work for him and to help get all of this finished. And of course, Solomon accumulated wealth. We see it in the flocks and the herds, in the gold and the silver. He was the wealthiest and wisest man in the whole world. And yet he was unhappy. Because this is what he learned, church, is that activity alone does not bring lasting pleasure. Now, with a little bit of thought, I think we can begin to understand why. It's exciting to get involved in a big project of some kind, isn't it? It's exciting to maybe be building a house or to be building a business or to have something going on. It's exciting to be building a new church building. But then comes the inevitable question. All right, you got it built. Now what? Now what? What comes next? Solomon found delight in all of his labor. Clearly he enjoyed them. Chapter 2, verse 10, he found excitement in them. But afterward, when he considered all of the works that he saw, the only thing that he saw was vanity and vexation of his spirit. Because you see, what happens is that in the midst of a challenging project, we human beings, we pour everything that we have into the process of completing it. And we get excited and we get that momentum and everything is awesome, and that becomes the end. If I get one, man, this is the ultimate goal. Let's get this project done. And when the completion and the completion of that project, unfortunately, often leads to a letdown. Because we look at the finished product and again we say, okay, now what? We poured all of this energy, all of these resources into getting this done. Now where should I place those things? Where should I place that energy now? And if your life is built around the idea of finding satisfaction from projects and finding satisfaction from hard work, what are you going to do? You're going to move to the next project. You're going to go find something else to build. You're going to go find something else to get in to work on. And then you're going to get to the end of that one and you're going to ask what question? Okay, now what? Now don't misunderstand me. Solomon is not condemning hard work in and of itself. And we know this from looking at the writings of the Bible. From creation, God has always exalted man's ability to work. Why did when he created Adam and Eve, what was the first thing he told them? Work the garden. Why did he put them there? To work the garden. It was a gift. Work is considered and described to us as a gift from God. And if you don't believe me, talk to somebody who has lost their ability to work and tell me how they feel. Solomon in the book of Proverbs constantly exalts the idea of diligence and hard work while he condemns laziness and slothfulness. The point here in Ecclesiastes is that work alone cannot satisfy the human heart, regardless of how successful your work is. There's always more to build, more to do. Being a workaholic is no more satisfying than being a pleasure-seeking bum. Both of them have their problems. Neither one of them leaves you fully satisfied. But then in the midst of all of this meaningless pursuit, another reality occurs to Solomon. Look with me in chapter 2, beginning at verse 12. So I turned to consider, that's another way of saying I thought about this from a different angle. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after the wind. I hated all of my toil, in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will be a master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and I gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all of his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. Notice the strength of what he says in verse 17. I hated life. Why? Because the reality had struck him that all of this is just absolutely ridiculous. Because everyone dies in the end. I'm going to die, you're going to die. Statistics prove it, 1 out of 1 die, unless the Lord comes first, which He hadn't yet. And the truth is, it shouldn't surprise us that Solomon deals with this topic. I mean, after all, he said, I observed everything under the sun. And all throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, quite frequently, he talks about the reality of death. And when you look at everything under the sun, you have to deal with that reality. Now, some people see that as a really depressing fact. And for Solomon, it was initially a really depressing fact. It was a major factor in the way that he assessed the meaning of his life. We all die. Now, what did he note about it all? Well, according to his wisdom, concerning his wisdom in 12 through 17, he said, well, since both the wise man and the foolish man die, then what's the point of pursuing all of this knowledge and this wisdom? Oh, I know the answer to that question. Here's why you do it. You pursue the wisdom so that your wisdom can guide the next generation. Except he observes right here that in his own wording, he said, but they don't do that. Every generation struggles with the same stuff that the previous generation struggled with. They make the same mistakes that we did. Okay, well, maybe wisdom will help me to be remembered. If I can be wise enough and I can build up enough fame and purport because of my knowledge, then people will remember who I am. No. Now, Solomon is probably an exception to this because of who he is in God's scheme of all things. But how many famous people actually get remembered over the course of history? Very few. Very few. You might go find a blurb about them on Wikipedia now. But by and large, here's what happens, folks. In the grand scheme of it all, most of us, our name is going to be forgotten in the annals of history. Well, considering his wealth, what about all of the accomplishments? What about the wealth that I amassed and the work and all the projects that I finished up? He said, I worked hard for these things to acquire this wealth. But as the old adage goes, you can't take it with you. And so he observes that when I die, I'm going to have to leave it for somebody else. I worked my whole life in order to get all of this, and I'm going to wind up dying, and I'm going to leave it to somebody that may or may not take care of it. that may or may not appreciate it, may or may not use it properly. And that bothered him an awful lot. And so what are we supposed to do with this life? It's kind of the way that Solomon comes to the end of this. He says, what am I supposed to do with it? Are we supposed to sit back, do nothing, and waste away, living in misery and bemoaning the pointlessness of it all? Well, that's not exactly his solution. Really quick, verses 24 through 26 gives us the solution. There is nothing better then for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. Because apart from Him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases Him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, He has given the busyness of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. One thing to remember is that Solomon has been viewing all of these things, this idea of pursuing enjoyment, pursuing possessions, pursuing wisdom, and pursuing employment and toil and hard work. He's been looking at all of this as the source of fulfillment, as the source of satisfaction. And if you build your life around any of these things, you will always find them meaningless and chasing after the wind. But what Solomon came to understand is that life is not the means to some secret cosmic existential meaning. Rather, as he describes here, and he will do, I think it is 6 different times throughout the course of Ecclesiastes, he concludes that life is God's gift to you and me. And enjoying this life is God's will. Now understand, we're not talking about the fatalistic philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's not what we're talking about. Instead, it's something more along these lines. He's talking about living a life that says, thank you, God, for what you have done. And I am going to enjoy this and give glory to you as the giver of all good things. Paul will say essentially the same thing in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, when he points out that it is God who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. We do that through personal enjoyment, but we also do it through sharing, through giving of all of it. We were never meant to be reservoirs. We were meant to be channels. God didn't create you in order to just amass as much of His blessings as possible and never let it flow out from you. He created us to receive the blessings and then to pour them out to other people as well. And so in the long run, here's what we know. Where do we find our meaning in life? Well, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to live the good life. Live a good life, not the good life. Live a good life. Live one that follows God. Enjoy the fruits of your labor while you can. Don't chase after all of this with the expectation of it lingering. Don't let these things become your purpose or become your identity. But as one commentator said, it is vanity and vexation of spirit for the sinner to heap up riches and yet ignore God. Because apart from God, there can be no true enjoyment of blessings or enrichment of life. That's what really the bottom line is. And as we go throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, you will find that this is what he says. Remember God in the days of your youth. Keep His commandments. Keep your focus on Him. If you live for God's glory and for God's purposes, you can enjoy the work of the toil of your life. You can enjoy the fruit of your labors. You can enjoy the knowledge and the wisdom that you gain, because you will understand that they came from above. And you will understand that your identity comes not from these things, but it comes from the great giver. And so tonight, that is our encouragement as we close this out. Are you struggling to see the point of it all? Are you struggling to see the point of it all in life? Are you on the hamster wheel? Well, then maybe you need to reevaluate who or what you are actually chasing after. Are you chasing after purpose and meaning from your work? Are you chasing after satisfaction from surface level enjoyment and entertainment? It's never going to satisfy. Instead, we encourage you to pursue God and His glory, and then you will have meaning. Then you will have satisfaction. Chase your own self-made satisfaction and you'll never find it. And so tonight, the question is here. If you need to become a Christian, if you need to give your life to Him in the waters of baptism, you have that opportunity. If you need to recommit yourself to God's glory and God's ways, we're here to pray with you. What are you going to do with the opportunity? Will you take advantage, or will you let it flit away like a bit of vapor? The choice is yours right now while we stand and sing.